So it's finally the new year, 2023, and it's had me thinking about, of all the gear purchases in 2022, which stood out as the best purchases, and then which also stood out to me as not the best purchases. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the 4 items that I absolutely do not regret getting in 2022, 2 items that I do regret getting in 2022, and 1 item that is my first purchase of 2023 that I absolutely don't regret at all, but it relates to one of the items that I purchased in 2022. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Geoff Fagien. I'm a filmmaker, DP, content creator, and here on this channel, I talk a lot about filmmaking, whether that's gear, tutorials, or just about things that happen to me while on the shoot to help educate you about video. So if you're interested in that, make sure to hit the subscribe button and that notification bell. So my very first purchase of 2022 is going to be first on the list of things that I don't regret buying. That's going to be the Amaran 60D. Now that is a 65 watt light that is daylight balanced and is extremely light and portable. It's my favorite, number 1, because it's light and portable, number 2, because it can also be battery powered. So although I don't use it as a key light a lot unless I'm doing content creation and it's in a space that's completely controlled lighting wise, I really bring that on a lot of shoots as an extra light, whether I'm going to use that as a spotlight, hair light, rim light. Just having an extra really small and portable COB light has made the difference, and like I said, I bring it on every single shoot I go to just because of how small and portable it is. I did a video on that and everything else I'm going to talk about in today, so I'll make sure to put a card above and a description to those videos in the links below. In addition to being able to be battery powered, there is that V-mount clip on the side of the Amaran 60D and the 60X, which makes it really easy to put a V-mount battery, especially if you have a small one, and just mount it straight to the camera. Although it is a dummy port, you're still going to need some kind of D-tap to barrel connector to be able to power that light. The other cool thing about the 60D is the fact that the barrel connector does have a lock on it. So if you get the right type of barrel connector, you can make sure that you lock it inside the 60D, and it'll prevent it from being unplugged on set if anyone pulls on it the wrong way. Now when it comes to the second item, this is the Surrey 35mm 1.8, specifically the RF mount that I use a lot on the Red Komodo. Now you're going to see a pattern of all the gear that I really like, so if you figure it out before I get to the end of the video, make sure to put in the comments what you think it is. But I really like the image quality from this lens. I like that it's really small and light and can be used on the gimbal. I've used it for a wedding on the gimbal and just got fantastic quality from this lens combination paired with the Red Komodo. I have used it on the R7, but I haven't used it enough to give you a definitive answer whether I like it or not, but I've obviously used it on the Komodo because these Surrey anamorphics are specifically made for Super 35 or APS-C lenses. Not to mention the fact that this is an f1.8, meaning that it does help in low light scenarios, which you don't really get that much when it comes to anamorphic lenses. All of the newer anamorphic lenses, even from Surrey that are coming out, are pretty much around that T2.8, 2.9 area, so they're definitely not as good in low light as these little APS-C lenses are. However, these are only really usable on APS-C or Super 35 cameras, so you do have to note that. So they do have a place in someone's ecosystem, in someone's camera ecosystem. My only complaint about these is because they don't have electronic mounts. They're pretty much dummy mounts, as you can see right here. There's no electronic contacts on them. And my only wish for these, and it's a wish that I'll get into a future video, but I wish that because there's these screws right here, I wish you could actually change out the mounts and I wouldn't just be stuck using these with my Red Komodo or my R7. I would love to be able to put some kind of Sony adapter on and be able to use this with my FX30, since that's a Super 35 APS-C camera from Sony with 10-bit and slow-mo and all that goodness. Now, Surrey actually offered that with their Micro Four Thirds version of the 35mm and the 50mm. However, they don't offer it in the RF versions. And I don't know exactly why, but I do know that when they came out with this RF version and the L-mount version, they made a small physical change to the bottom of the body. And as you see here, it's a little bit flat. And on the other versions of this lens, it's a little bit rounded on the bottom. So I don't know if they had to change the glass at the end or if it's just the body. But I know there was a slight modification to the RF and L versions. So it may be impossible, but I would love to see it if it is possible. Now the next item is this Zhiyun Crane M2s. M2s. Now, I bought it in April of 2022, and I have used it a lot, so much so that on my last trip, if you missed my last video, I actually ended up breaking it, so I'm sending it in to repair. But I love this gimbal. Number one, I love it obviously because it's lightweight. Number two, it works with mirrorless cameras. Now, it doesn't work with DSLRs because of how heavy the setup ends up being once you put a lens on it, but whether you have a full frame mirrorless, crop censored mirrorless, it will work with light lenses on both full frame and crop sensor. And then plus it has an LED on the front if you're trying to film at night. It charges via USB-C, and because of how small the gimbal is itself, it's really portable. And normally I don't bring a gimbal with me when I'm going on vacation. I just don't like traveling with gimbals because even the smallest gimbals tend to be big. But with the Crane M2s, that's really not an issue at all. It's super easy to travel with it, and I really enjoy this gimbal. I can't speak enough about how much it's really helped me, not just for real estate, but also for content creation here on the channel as well, because I've been doing a lot of vlogging lately for the channel, and instead of being handheld or on a tripod, I've been bringing the gimbal with me everywhere. So it's been able to let me get going really fast while on the go and have really stable and unique footage. Now, the last item that I don't regret purchasing in 2022 is the DJI Mini 3 Pro. Now, I purchased this out of necessity originally because my DJI Mavic 2 Pro ended up failing on me. It ended up having an IMU error and a bunch of other stuff. I've gone into this story in another video. I'll put a link in the description below. But essentially, I needed a drone, and I purchased it because it just came out. It had a bigger sensor than the Mini 2. It had 10-bit, and the Mini 2 was extremely quiet, way quieter than my Mavic 2 Pro. After using the Mini 2, I knew that I just needed to jump to the Mini 3. It had 10-bit, it had 4K 60, it had a lot of features that I would use. So once I purchased it and started using it, I've been using it nonstop. I mean, I go flying with this thing all the time, and it's really not for gig work. I fly with it all the time just because it's a fun drone to fly. It's really small, really light, really quiet, has really decent quality video and pictures. You really just can't beat it. Now, the one video mode that it has that I didn't intend on using at first, but was an absolute game changer when it comes to not just content creation for me, but for other clients that I work for that want content creation, that want vertical video, and that is the vertical shooting mode on the Mini 3 Pro. And the fact that you can shoot full quality in vertical and you don't have to crop into your 16:9 video was an absolute amazing, I'm gonna say it, a game changer for me when it comes to drone content creation, because now I have much better quality vertical video from this super small, light, and compact drone. Now let's talk about the two items that I do regret getting in 2022. Now, these pieces of camera gear are not bad. The reason I regret getting them is because they didn't work in my workflow as much as I anticipated they would, and they also weren't that cheap, so I ended up having to sell both of them pretty much at the start of this year. So number one is going to be Sigma's 24-70 4 EF mount cameras. Now, I bought the EF mount version because I knew that, just like a lot of my other Sigma arts, having EF mount would let me go between all of my cameras, whether it was my RF cameras, if I wanted to get a Blackmagic camera in the future that had an EF mount, my Sony FX30 with the Sigma MC11 adapter, I could use that lens with all of my cameras. But I also had to buy the 24-70 because at the time, I only had two full-frame RF lenses, were the 16mm and the 35mm. Then I also had a 70-200 f4, but those all have their own specific uses. I didn't really have a general purpose lens, so the Sigma 24-70 made the most sense. It's got really decent image quality, and that's really the main reason I got it. However, after using it for a bit, my biggest gripe with it was how heavy it was. I did not anticipate how heavy that lens was, and I probably should have known what I was getting into after using the 18-35, the 50-100. Those are not light lenses either, but they work really well in my crop-censored Super 35 ecosystem, and I didn't mind the weight as much as I minded it on the 24-70. The other issue I had with the 24-70 was the reversal of the zoom ring and the focus ring. So the focus ring was actually closer to the EF lens mount, meaning that it was reversed from a typical lens. On top of that, for whatever reason, they made the focus ring much thinner than any focus ring I've ever used on any lens, unless it's a super small lens itself, which made manual focus a lot more difficult than, using other lenses, especially other Sigma art lenses like the 18-35, the 50-100. Even my 30mm had a bigger focus ring than the focus ring that was available on the 24-70. Now with that, the second item I regret getting in 2022 is the Canon R6. Now this is the Mark I, not the more recent Mark II. And it's kind of a mixed bag why I regret getting it, because on one hand, the R6 got me into owning current gen mirrorless cameras. I've used mirrorless cameras in the past for different clients. For when I was working at Cardone, we used the FX3 all the time, and I was used to mirrorless cameras, but I didn't own any at the time because all of my work outside of, really content creation and client work, Blackmagic cameras and my RED Komodo really did most of the heavy lifting for me. But I've told the story a few times. After working for Cardone using the FX3 all the time, I decided to move to mirrorless. And the only reason I didn't get the FX3 like I was used to was because of my RED Komodo and the lenses I had for it. So at the time, I thought getting the R6 made the most sense for me. However, after using it, I ran into some issues. Mainly, the biggest issue was the overheating. That thing overheated all the time, especially in 4K 60, which is kind of the reason I bought the R6 over the R5. The R6 was the only camera at the time that shot downscaled from a higher resolution down to 4K 60, and it at a very minor full frame crop of 1.1, where cameras like the A7 IV did shoot 4K 60. However, it was at an actual crop in of the sensor to around Super 35 APS-C. I didn't want that, at least at the time. Then on top of the overheating in 4K 60, whenever I used that camera for over an hour, whether it was for live streaming, corporate work, whatever, I would always get overheating signs. So it just wasn't a usable main mirrorless camera, which is why when I got the R7 and when I got the FX30, I ditched the R6 as soon as I could, because as decent as the image was when you recorded internally, at least for what I needed it to be, it just wasn't up to par with what I needed out of a main camera for a lot of my lower end videography type work. Then there was the whole conundrum with using that camera with external monitors, which to an extent I still have the same problem with the R7, and it's that if you hook up an external monitor to the camera, unless you're okay with seeing the actual display in your external monitor, you can't record internally. If you need a clean feed to your external monitor, then you end up losing the feed to your internal monitor, which means you lose all of the touch focus capabilities. And if you're doing a lot of run and gun work, having to be able to touch focus, click on somebody's face, do whatever, it helps immensely. On top of that, for external recording, if you're shooting in C-Log3 Cinema Gamut, which is the best video quality coming out of the R6, the R5, unless of course you're shooting internal RAW on the R5, for whatever reason, the colors, especially skin tones, shooting externally to an external recorder in C-Log3 Cinema Gamut on the R6 and the R5, you got yellowish skin tones, which don't appear like that on the internal image recording. So for me, external recording, stuff like that, it just didn't make sense anymore. And that was one of the final straws with the R6 for me, because I just couldn't believe it was such an oversight from Canon. They never said anything about it. I'm hoping it's something that's fixed on the R6 Mark II, but I haven't really heard much about it. Now, my last con with the R6 happened to be with its forced use of its crop video mode when using crop censored lenses like the Sigma 18-35, 50-100. As I've said a little bit before in this and other videos, most of my lenses are crop censored lenses. So when I wanted to be able to use them on the R6, although the autofocus worked great, I was forced to use its crop censored mode, which was nowhere near the same video quality as its full frame mode. So in some of these lenses that could resolve an image at full frame, I would have loved to be able to just use the full frame of the camera and just make sure that I was at focal lengths that fully covered full frame. But the R6 would not let you do that. And that was a huge issue for me, because then that meant there were so many lenses that I had that I just could not use with the R6. So that was 2022. Let's talk about 2023 in my first buy of this year. And that's going to be the Surrey 75mm that I have paired right here with my RED Komodo. Now, the reason it was my first buy of 2023 was the fact that in Surrey's lineup, if you get their 35mm, their 75mm, or their 24mm, all of those lenses match as you would want to expect from cinema type lenses or getting lenses in the same family, to where if you're going from same camera, same lens to, you know, a different camera but the same lens in the same family, you could get them to match really well. And when I saw how great the 35 looked, especially when I was doing a lot of my testing, shooting it for that wedding, I decided that the one thing I was missing was having a lens to where I can get better close-up footage and still stay anamorphic. I don't mind the 1.33 squeeze factor. I think that's really good to get me near CinemaScope in a 17:9 image from the Komodo. So the 75mm made a lot of sense, and I actually plan on using it on a short film shooting here at the end of the month here in January. So stay tuned, because there will be tons of behind the scenes content. It's going to be a sci-fi based short film, and I think you guys are going to be really excited with what we have planned, using not only the 35mm Surrey, but the 75mm Surrey and the Red Komodo. It's going to be insane. I can't wait to show you all. So if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments below. And if you got knowledge and value out of today's video, please make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up to date with the latest videos from the channel. Till next time, my name's Geoff Fagien. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I will see you in the next video.